Good morning. Sometime last year, when the bishop informed me that he intended to assign me to deliver this month's monthly service sermon, I must admit that I was reluctant to accept, but then I realized that it wasn't really a request so much as a command given with a smile. So since that time, I have been trying to formulate my thoughts and think to myself what I might talk about. For example, June is normally the month that the Young Men's Association holds their annual convention, and so I lightly wondered to myself what I could possibly talk about that might be relevant or timely to that. As the days, then weeks, then months went by, I decided to perhaps focus my talk on my thoughts regarding some splendid divine guidance that I had been receiving from God the Parent over the last few years. What I could not have imagined was just a few months later, finding myself in the middle of a sort of tempest of uncertainty and social upheaval. As we are all too aware, the last several months have been a time of great anxiety for us here in North America, and indeed across the world. From the vast numbers of people who have lost and are continuing to lose their lives to this disease of COVID-19, and the social isolation of shelter in place as a result of trying to mitigate the spread, the widespread social protests that spread throughout the world as a result of the killing of George Floyd. So much of what we thought was normal just a few months ago has seemingly been flipped completely on its head. There is indeed a great deal that God the Parent has shown to us and provided us a cause to reflect upon and to ponder our faith in what it means in these turbulent times. With these circumstances being the backdrop of my giving this sermon, and as I have been assigned this task, I would humbly ask for your patience and understanding as I share a few thoughts with you. I couldn't have imagined, not even in the deepest recesses of my self-centered imaginings, that I would need to ever try to deliver a sermon under these present circumstances. There is no doubt in my mind that God the Parent is showing me my causality through this timing. I'm just not certain that I have the wisdom to sufficiently make sense of it all. There is without a doubt a tremendous amount of angst and uncertainty in the hearts of many of us surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic, because of the unfathomable number of people being infected as well as affected by the resulting tragic loss of far too many lives. I would like to ask you to join with me in a moment of silent prayer to pray for those that are directly facing the disease, whether as patients or as caregivers, and for those many tens of thousands that have passed away for rebirth, as well as praying for settling of our social fabric. Thank you. I pray that God the Parent and Oyasama provide those that are ill with blessings for a full and speedy recovery and to keep others safe from infection. In this time of uncertainty, I would imagine that I'm not the only one that has wondered when we might get back to a quote-unquote normal, or what this new normal might even look like, or even if it's possible. I wonder if it would be possible to get back to a situation where we feel completely safe from COVID-19. I'm reminded of the expression that the only thing we can depend on with certainty is death and taxes. Now, this may be what the world may view as normal, but the truest state of normality, the state of normality that God the Parent desires for us all, is, I believe, a state or condition that is not different from person to person, despite the fact that each of us has been blessed to have our own individual perspectives. however we might each define what normal means. I think if we think deeply about what God the Parent taught us through Oya-sama, we can notice a specific way of perceiving that our connectedness to one another is in essence the normalcy we should be seeking. It should arise from realizing that we are all children of God and that we are therefore all brothers and sisters. In other words, this universal siblinghood, so to speak, is what God the Parent wishes us to grasp if we are going to bring about a settling of the world. We have been taught over and over that as we are all the children of God the Parent, and therefore we must settle this truth in our hearts and strive to love and respect one another. In the Ofudasaki we find the quote, we find the verse, "All of you throughout the world are brothers and sisters. There should be no one called an outsider." We can understand this to mean that we ought to love, respect, and help one another. Further we read, quote, "The reason Tsukihi began human beings was the desire to see you lead a joyous life. Because the world does not know this truth, everyone sinks only deeper into depression." End quote. It is clear to see that through working spiritedly, helping and saving one another, we can spread happiness and peace and bring delight to God the Parent. God the Parent didn't intend us to live our lives in happiness and contentment at the expense of others. For as we are taught, only when our joy brings joy to others can it be called true joy. The more we are all able to carry ourselves with this mindset, I believe we will be able to touch those around us with genuine affection. Unfortunately, we have no shortage of examples of how people all over the world are seemingly living their lives without concern for others. We have seemingly strayed far away from what God the Parent and Oya-sama envisioned. Mutual help, love, and respect are lessons that may seem outdated to some, but I would submit that there is nothing more relevant, especially in these turbulent times. Speaking about normal, I'm sure it isn't lost on anyone that my sharing my thoughts with you through this medium is obviously anything but normal. But among the many things that I must do differently is not making my monthly journey down to Los Angeles to attend the monthly service. I haven't been able to attend a monthly service at Dendocho for almost half a year. It feels quite awkward trying to adjust to these new shelter-in-place recommendations and exercising physical distancing. In February, right around the time that COVID-19 was quietly and rapidly spreading across the globe, and the magnitude of the disease was still being debated in different circles, I was in a situation that gave me a bit of a fright. The day before my church's monthly service, I was outside mowing the lawn when it started to rain fairly heavily. I wanted to finish the mowing as I had completed most of it already, so I pushed on. I was able to finish, but that evening I started to feel somewhat sluggish. I felt a slight fatigue and a tickle in my throat. Fortunately, I was able to complete the monthly service the following day, but that evening I started to feel slightly feverish and I started to cough a little. I felt tired, so I knew I ought to go to bed early. By the next morning, it was quite clear that I had come down with something more than just a little cold. I needed to stay in bed to rest. I developed a high fever and a heavy, persistent cough. As there are others also living at my church, I became quite concerned about potentially infecting others and began to take measures to somewhat isolate myself from the others at the church by avoiding close contact while I tried to make arrangements to get tested for whatever it was that I might have come down with. I was fairly sure it wasn't COVID-19, but I couldn't be absolutely sure. I began to realize that even though I was feeling ill, I had to do whatever I could to not get others sick. I went to the hospital emergency room as my doctor instructed me and got tested and found out that I had fortunately only been infected with the A strain of the influenza. It was clearly a moment of good news, bad news, but I strangely felt comforted by that diagnosis and thanked God the Parent for blessing me and everyone. I thank God the Parent for blessing me with only giving me the flu, obviously, and not the COVID-19. I called a couple of our church members that had attended monthly service to ask if everyone was all right. But much to my dismay and shock, I had found out that I had infected the daughter of one of our followers, and she subsequently infected her father. I felt miserable about having been responsible for their having gotten ill, but they assured me that after having received the osazake, they were able to feel much better after a day or two. I felt so relieved and grateful that it wasn't something far worse. I couldn't help but think about the what ifs. It was an instance that made me think that God the Parent had not only given me divine guidance in the form of the flu, but also showed me that taking measures to not get others sick can be a way of showing love and concern for others. It also seemed clear to me that part of what God the Parent was telling me was that I urgently needed to reflect upon how to be more mindful of the value of connecting with others through the teachings. We know that all things that occur are from God the Parent's unwavering love and affection for all of us. As we are taught in the doctrine of Tenrikyo, quote, God is in every way our loving parent, whose love and concern for us is without limit. But we conduct our lives unaware of this parental love. We disregard the truth of heaven and are overconfident of our own strength. We are selfish in our thinking and in our actions, and in the all-seeing eyes of God the Parent who rules over everything, we are like toddlers wandering off on their own. Nothing could be more dangerous than this, end quote. But despite our dust-filled minds, making obstacles for ourselves, obstacles that are born out of our own folly, God the Parent spares no effort to caringly guide us towards salvation. In the Ofudesaki, we find the verse, quote, Tutsukihi, all of you in the world are my children. Love for you fills me. This is my single heart. End quote. We are taught that this is the normality that will bring about world salvation. And I have to say, I find that comforting. I have been shown over the past few years a fairly steady string of splendid examples of divine guidance, much of which I am still being guided and tested currently, but I feel a greater sense of gratitude about the many times that I have been shown God the Parent's countless saving graces, even through divine guidance. A couple of years ago, one night, I was sound asleep when I awoke to the terrifying inability to breathe except in short gasps. It went away after a few seconds, but it was certainly unsettling, to say the least. A couple of nights later, it returned, and this time it didn't go away. I spent many nights trying whatever I could to do to sleep, unsuccessfully. It was a tug of war between exhaustion and the inability to take a breath, with my senses in the middle being pulled back and forth. My mother administered the osazake for me every day, and after what seemed like an eternity, I gradually regained the ability to breathe somewhat normally and sleep somewhat restfully, although it took a period of weeks. The normal function of taking a breath never felt so good. It was discovered later that the cause was from congestive heart failure. I was told that my heart function was operating at a roughly 20% capacity. When the heart reaches a functional capacity of 10 to 15%, it isn't unusual to begin considering a heart transplant procedure. This quote-unquote normal functioning of the human body was indeed no longer a given. These simple bodily functions that are so central to our very existence are truly blessings that can't be overstated, but are often underappreciated. It is truly a joyous feeling to know how God the Parent blesses, guides, and protects us each and every day. Thanks to God the Parent's blessings, I am doing quite a bit better now, and dare I say, feeling normal. I do indeed feel so blessed to be here today in all of my shortcomings and flaws. I pray that we can come to the realization that normal isn't necessarily measured by the circumstances that surround us, but how we are able to find a reason to be heartened in whatever those circumstances may be. Our current times may feel somewhat unprecedented, but if we look to the past, we can find times of even greater uncertainty, like world wars and even deadlier pandemics. For example, the Spanish flu in 1918, exactly 100 years ago, for example, killed at least 50 million people worldwide, with at least 675,000 here in the US alone. In comparison, how blessed we are to be alive in an age where we can be more readily able to help one another. I would like to conclude my remarks by thanking you for sharing your time with me and ask you all to please be safe. And I hope that we all will be able to join together in performing the service again soon. Thank you.